You're listening to the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan.
Well, hey there, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Just Japan podcast. It's episode 214. It's me, Kevin O'Shea. I'm back with you. Another episode about Japan. Some cool stuff happening here. Happy to be back. A few days late with this episode. Life gets in the way. Work gets busy. Your kids have soccer tournaments, or, as they say here, football tournaments. And, of course, when that happens, podcast episodes don't always get out when you expect them to. But we're back, and in this episode, I've got a fantastic conversation with James Reynolds, of course, known as Earth Uncut TV. Now, the cool thing about James is he recently spoke to me and my class. That's right. So the interview that you are going to hear is actually from September of 2023. It's from the Just Asia podcast. The podcast I was doing that's very similar in vein to the Just Japan podcast, but I did have some guests on who were based in Korea, Indonesia, China. But, of course, like I said in the past, I decided to jump right back into the Just Japan podcast. Now, James, of course, is based in Tokyo, and between there and Nagano and the rest of Asia, he's doing lots of amazing and exciting things. So this was a conversation we had in the fall of 2023, a fantastic conversation. And I really wanted to share this with you in this feed. Of course, now James has been on the Just Japan podcast again many years ago. But yeah, so just a few days ago, he spoke to my year 3 class here in Malaysia all about his amazing, exciting job. And my students were so pumped and stoked after talking to him. It's really amazing. So we are doing kind of an earth sciences type geology sort of science-based unit of inquiry in school. And we're learning about different types of rocks. We're learning about tectonic plates, earthquakes, volcanoes. So I couldn't think of anyone better to help me out than someone who makes a living traveling around the world, going to volcanoes and filming them. And, so James is a extreme weather filmmaker. He is someone who does amazing things with typhoons, filming typhoons, getting in the way of typhoons. He goes the direction. We're all trying to get away from them. He's going to them. So, the man's got such an exciting job. He's probably got one of the most exciting jobs I've ever heard of. And my students were so stoked, and they're just like, he's got the coolest job in the world. And one of the neat things in the interview with my students, one of the kids said, "How did you get your job?" And he kind of laughed and said, "Well, it's not a job you kind of look for. It kind of happened. It was a hobby that turned into a career." And that was really neat. So, yeah. And before we move on to that interview, I just want to let you know, guys, that you can support the Just Japan podcast and the Supernatural Japan podcast over on Patreon. You can become a patron. We've got 2 tiers. No matter what tier you join, you're going to get bonus content galore. If you're in any tier, a ninja or a samurai, you're going to get free episodes, or you're going to get episodes of the Spicy Wasabi podcast, lots of bonus content. And the most recent episode of the Spicy Wasabi podcast, I chat with Brian Waters, a.k.a. My2Yen on X, down in Fukuoka, Japan. And we had a great conversation talking about weird gaijin, strange gaijin we've met during our years in Japan, and I share a story about Korea. It was a great conversation, and you can listen to that if you become a patron. And of course, in the upper tiers, you can get video versions of all of the episodes of the podcast. You can actually watch the faces and interviews of us all in person, and there's lots of other cool stuff. So go check that out. The link will be in the show notes. Patreon.com/JustJapanPodcast97. Don't know why the 97, but check that link out and you can support the creations that I make. All right, now let's get on to my conversation with James Reynolds. I'm very excited to have someone who will be a friend of this show. He's a friend of other shows. James Reynolds, thanks for coming on the Just Asia podcast for the first time.
Thank you for having me, and a friend of Kevin, I think is a good way to describe
absolutely.
it. It's good to be with you.
I'm really excited about this one. I'm excited to have you on. I'm excited for you listeners to listen to this James story. If you are someone who is coming over from the Just Japan podcast from days back, you may have remembered one of my interviews with James. And I'm not sure if you were on only one time. You were on definitely at least one time. And you were on my Nature Talks podcast, my environmental podcast.
Yeah, that was, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much. And likewise. And so I want to jump into this, of course, by asking you a question I ask, of course, all guests. If you could just introduce yourself to the listeners, let them know a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and where you're based.
Sure. Well, I'm originally from the UK. That's where I was born. But for the last, 17, 18 years, I've been stomping around Asia. I kind of landed in Shanghai back in 2006 as just out of university. I had a degree in Chinese, and the logical place to go was China. Spent 3 years there just finding my feet, figuring out what direction I wanted to go in life. Had no idea what I wanted to do. But made some really good contacts there. Had a really interesting job in like a real base level kind of TV production. So helping foreign productions shooting in China. So it was a great kind of exposure into the industry I would later fall into. So yeah, 3 years in Shanghai, then down to Hong Kong, met a beautiful woman and kind of followed her to Hong Kong, as one does. Happy to say she's now the mother of my kids and we're happily married. But yeah, no, 7 years in Hong Kong, which was fabulous. It was the most amazing, I caught some of the real great years in Hong Kong. And then 2016, the family, the boys were starting to get a little bit older. We decided that Japan, and my wife is Japanese, would be kind of a logical and lovely place to raise the family, being nature lovers and, that kind of thing. So yeah, been here since 2016.
Wow.
But throughout all those years, I've kind of been pursuing a rather unconventional career in storm chasing, volcano hunting, snowdrift dodging, flood wading. Just running my one-man band production company, shooting wild nature, I think is kind of sums it up perfectly.
Yeah, so let's get into that a little bit more, because I think one of there's a lot of fascinating things about you, James, but definitely your profession is one that catches people right away. And that's the reason why you were on one of those early episodes of the Just Japan podcast, why I brought you onto the Nature Talks podcast. I don't want to say what you do is unique, but it's pretty close. There's not a lot of people doing what you do. So for those out there who the uninitiated, and soon they will be, especially once they follow your Twitter and your YouTube, what is it you do for a profession, and how the heck did you find yourself in it? I'm a teacher. Mine's pretty conventional. Yours isn't.
So yeah, there's two main focuses: tropical cyclones, which are hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones in the southern hemisphere. All the same storm, they just have different names. Each time a big one of those is looking like it's going to threaten and hit land, I try and get in the middle of it and film it, basically. Try and get into the area where the worst weather is happening, the craziest winds, the biggest waves, the heaviest rain. And that can be quite difficult. So that kind of means most people don't do what I do because it's
normally they try to avoid them, right?
Hazardous. Most people are evacuating. I'm charging into the landfall zone.
You're going the wrong way, James. You're like, nope,
this is the way I want to go.
Yeah.
Away from the traffic. So there's that, and then the other half, my passion is split into two, kind of more or less evenly, is the volcanoes, volcanic eruptions. This is all kind of started from high school geography class back in the days where the teacher would stick on a VHS of like a Raging Planet or Discovery documentary. And you're like, woohoo, not only do we have an easy lesson coming up, but there'd also be some cool documentaries. And just from as a young kid, I was fascinated by this stuff, partly because I was growing up in the UK, which has none of this. for us, an exciting weather is maybe a bit of a gale in October or a centimeter or two of snow. It's just mostly not very exciting. So just having that kind of burning curiosity as a child and then graduating that upwards, as I got older as an adult, it already kicked off in 2005 when I was like an exchange student in Taiwan. Okay, yeah. And I kind of rocked up there, wanting to know where the best bars were, looking to make friends and stuff, and not really thinking about weather and typhoons. That this kind of stuff wasn't even on my radar until one mid-July, evening, Taiwan got hit by a massive typhoon, and I was like, wow, like this is like a force of nature I've never witnessed firsthand before. And from then on, I was absolutely kind of just hooked. I wanted to see more. I wanted to explore this phenomenon more. And that's really where it all started. I started taking a camera into these things. This was very much the early days of YouTube, as you'll remember, 2006. That's when I uploaded my first YouTube video of a typhoon. And then people started knocking on the door going, hey, this is interesting footage. Can we buy it off you for our documentary? And things over the course of the next 4 or 5 years just kind of gradually snowballed into starting my own production company. It's a one-man band. It's me, and taking me around the world, wherever I need to go, wherever I want to go, whenever I want to go. That's basically the situation now, with a few kind of hiccups and bumps along the way outside of my control. Yeah. It's right now I'm feeling pretty blessed to have that flexibility and still be pursuing my dream, 17 years later.
That's amazing. So in 2006, when YouTube was a baby and you put one of your first videos up of a typhoon, and like I said just before recording, my very first video was one I took on a camera that had no microphone, of a bunch of people standing on a beach in Busan, Korea. And it's so grainy. You would think I filmed it with like one of those like high 8 cameras from the 1960s or something.
Yeah, likewise. Mine is equally awful.
But that's amazing. That's so cool. What you're doing now, and for everyone out there listening, if you're not on Twitter, get on Twitter just to follow James. That's Earth Uncut TV. When you're in action, it's amazing to follow you, to see what you're in. When you're knee deep in it, it's just from my end as an armchair typhoon enthusiast. It's quite fascinating because I spent 10 years in Kobe, but ironically enough, I love a good storm. That's one thing I've always said. I love storm. I love when there's lightning and thunder. But it seemed that the 10 years that I lived in Kobe, how many times was a typhoon bearing down on us? And it seemed like Kobe, Osaka, that area, at least when I lived there, seemed to have some kind of shield, some kind of Superman-like shield that the typhoons would like bounce off of at the last minute, and everything always kind of swerved over towards Wakayama or went the other way. And it just I don't think I ever really experienced anything major other than some good blows, and a few small like limbs knocking off of trees, but never experienced in those years anything really of note. Yeah.
Yeah, these things can go in cycles, and obviously any one point on a large coastline, the odds of getting a direct hitter in any year are kind of low. But yeah, these things go in cycles, certain areas can just be hit repeatedly, one after another, whilst others go years without seeing any action. And then suddenly the switch flips and the patterns change, and then areas which weren't getting hit are getting smashed. It's just the funny way that nature works, But
trying to predict nature is not an easy job as well, right?
No, it's not. And it seems to be getting harder. Nature's throwing more curveballs and surprises at us, as each year goes by. So yeah,
it's speaking of curveballs that were thrown our way, the last time I spoke to you was for an episode of the Nature Talks podcast. And for anyone listening, if you join the Facebook group, which you should, the Facebook group for the Just Asia podcast, in that I will add a link to the original interview I did with James back a billion years ago on the Just Japan podcast. But I'll also add a link to our talk on the Nature Talks podcast, which was an environmental education podcast I ran. And during that, interview, it was quite a different vibe, because at that point you were in a holding pattern. You were pinned down in Tokyo because it was in the midst of COVID. So what was it like to do what you do at that point in time?
Well, I'm going to be careful because there's probably only, one other person who I know who had it worse during COVID than we did here, and that's you. So
that's okay.
No, look, honestly, looking at the bigger picture, Japan was a good place to be during, the horrible COVID years. We had basically freedom of movement. You could still go out and grab a beer. The restaurants were mostly open, and we didn't get hit that badly until later on. So look, bigger picture, it was fine, but
professionally, it was a tough.
I hadn't realized for how lucky I had been and how special what I had was, to be able to just do what I do, pursue that passion. And I still see it as a hobby. It's not really work. It is how I make a living, but it's not work. I kind of see myself as retired, but I happen to chase storms and make a living doing that. But to have all that suddenly taken away from you due to circumstances outside of your control, it was a shock to the system. And the first few months where all week, we all realized, okay, this thing isn't going away. It's around going to be around for a long time. And then you saw all the rules and the government kind of restrictions started piling on. It was a very kind of helpless, sickening feeling. And I don't want to say anything controversial. It was obviously a very serious disease and a serious global health emergency, but at no point during the pandemic, during the whole pandemic, the thing which I feared most was not the virus, but it was the controls and the restrictions.
Yeah, absolutely.
That terrified me. How am I going to make a living? How long are my kids going to be off school? All this kind of stuff. The virus, I was like, I'm privileged, lucky enough to be a healthy, young-ish kind of guy. If it hits me, have at it. I'll do my best. But man, it was to just have your freedom of movement taken away from you. It was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And then about 2 years in, I kind of, emerging from the whole nightmare that it was, I think I'm in a better place, to be honest. It kind of forced me to rethink what I'm doing, and obviously be very thankful for what I have and be appreciative of that, because that's very important, not to get kind of, spoiled or complacent. And now, this year is really just getting back at it. And it feels good. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, and that's where I want to go next with this. I mean, you're back at 2023. Wow. Let's talk about that. Let's just even talk about the last week and a half with you. Dude. As I say to the young kids I teach, holy schmoly. I mean,
it's been one of those weeks, and you don't get them very often.
So let's talk about that week for the listeners. Can you? 3 years? If there's people who have not been following you, who don't follow you, say, for example, on Twitter or Instagram, tell us about the last week you've had. Where did it start and what's been going on?
Well, 2023 in general, so I've been mostly focusing on the Western Pacific typhoon season. So that usually kicks into gear in early July and then runs through to about mid-November. It's Christmas time, you can still get typhoons, but the bulk of it is between July and October. And this year is kind of, it's an El Nino year, so that means that the waters off the Pacific coast of South America are warmer than average. It causes all sorts of crazy weather phenomena around the world, but one of the byproducts of that is a busy typhoon season. But it's also been a really skewy typhoon season. I've spent a lot of it watching storms do kind of crazy things I've never seen them do before. Like, the tracks of these storms have been really, really difficult to predict. So a lot of this season has been spent at home just trying to figure out what these storms are going to do. And a lot of the time, going nowhere, just being sat at home, driven mad. But what was it? It must have been like 10 days ago, maybe 12 days ago. A typhoon formed off the east coast of Taiwan. And I was watching this typhoon and I was like, right, okay. It's heading south, which is really weird because typhoons don't normally head south. So that was the first head scratch. And I was like, right, am I going to be able to chase this thing? So first of all, the models were like, okay, it looks like it's going to Taiwan. So I kind of prepared, got everything packed and was ready to go to Taiwan. And then the forecast suddenly changed. And I was like, well, is it going to hit the Philippines? So I completely changed my plan. I looked into flights to some small islands in the northern Philippines, was prepared to go, wasted a whole day and a half just glued to the computer, being driven mad. And then at the last minute, I had to cancel that because the forecast kind of changed again. And eventually, it looked like it was lining up Hong Kong. And that's my old home. And I never want to miss a typhoon in Hong Kong. So what I did is I jumped on a last minute flight down to Hong Kong to have a crack at chasing this storm. And it was a very powerful typhoon. It was a super typhoon in the South China Sea. Thankfully for Hong Kong, it was a small storm, so it kind of weakened rapidly just before hitting the city. So they got off lightly. It could have been very bad, but just, a combination of factors, the track it took, dragging along the coast helped weaken it. Yeah. There's a bit of wind shear blowing in there, upper level winds, which the storms don't like. So I'm sat there. It blew pretty good. It was pretty wild at times. And I'm on my phone and I'm like, all right, okay, there's another typhoon. This one is definitely heading to Taiwan. And this is literally like in the eye wall of Typhoon Saola in Hong Kong. I'm like, right, I got to figure out do I kind of go to bed early on this typhoon so I can have a good night's sleep, get up early and try and go to Taiwan the next day? So yeah, go to sleep. And basically in the middle of the typhoon, I went to bed, got up the next morning. It's still terrible weather, but the airport is miraculously, they managed to open it quite quickly. Jump on a plane to Taiwan, get in at 3 p.m, and then I have less than 24 hours to get into position to chase this next storm. So I meet up with my buddy. We drive south from Taipei down the east coast of Taiwan, which is one of my most favorite places on planet Earth. It is just one of my happy places. It's spectacularly beautiful and amazing. Yeah, and pull into this sleepy little provincial town and tropical. It's hot, it's really steamy and hot. There's coconut palm trees everywhere. I imagine a bit like Penang, where you are in Malaysia. It feels tropical.
Oh, yeah.
Get up the next day and at 2:00 in the afternoon, we're getting smashed by a Category 3 typhoon, So this is what I used to do in the pre-COVID years when the Westpac was really busy. It was like you're checking the models for the next typhoon in the eye of a current typhoon. There's only one place in the world you can do that, and that is the Western Pacific, just because there's so many storms. So, and I just love doing that. It's a crazy adventure. It's like this complex puzzle which you're trying to solve. And when all the pieces fit together perfectly, it's a very rewarding feeling.
That's so
very kind of unique. And there's no one else doing it.
Yeah, and then now, unfortunately, as we watch, I'm just following on Twitter. I don't know if you've been seeing what's been going on in Hong Kong now with the rain in Shenzhen. Yes. Shenzhen and Hong Kong. That's insane. I'm watching. There is an educator I follow in Hong Kong on Twitter, and his name is Justin. His name is, I'm looking now at my Twitter, Justin Hardman, and he lives there, and he's been sharing some insane videos of just the flooding. It's just wow.
Yeah. And that was the remnants of the typhoon which hits Taiwan. So there you go. It's officially the typhoon's been dead for like 2 days, but that remnant circulation and moisture envelope, unfortunately, kind of stalled off the coast of Hong Kong and just brought in a deluge of rain. It's like record breaking.
Yeah, I'm seeing even in Shenzhen. And for those folks that are listening, if you don't know, I lived in Shenzhen for the last 4 years, and that's like basically right beside Hong Kong. It's on the mainland side. There's just a small body of water, bay, I should say. It's not that small actually, dividing, but nonetheless, it's really close. So anything if it hits Hong Kong, it's affecting.
Yeah, it's hitting Shenzhen. Yeah, totally.
Wow. So you're out there, recording video, you're recording audio, you're doing all this stuff. What I'm curious about, because I'm someone who loves toys, what kind of equipment does someone in your profession use to document these storms? Because I know one of the things you do is you sell your footage to channels, for documentaries, for lots of different things like that. So obviously you're not just using an iPhone. Now, mind you, nonetheless, an iPhone 14 or something like that does take some pretty damn fine, video, but I know that you're carrying around a lot more than just an iPhone. So what kind of gear do you carry to, when you're hopping on that airplane to fly to Hong Kong, to fly to Taiwan, what are you bringing with you?
Great question. And it is something which is continually evolving. It kind of depends on my mood as well. Okay. The one thing about a typhoon is hurricane, extreme weather, whatever. It's a very challenging environment to be operating a camera in because it's generally so wet and you're being buffeted around. Now, for the past 15 years, 16 years, 17 years, I've been a fan of having a big camera on a tripod tucked away somewhere, getting nice steady shots in the high quality of a storm as it's unfolding. However, this year I am starting to move away from that. Okay. Because you get very kind of glued to one spot, and that isn't necessarily a good thing. So what I have been using, and I'm considering using, especially in places where I have to travel a long way or places where the security situation isn't so great, is basically the iPhone 14 Pro Max Plus, whatever it's called. And basically every typhoon I filmed this year, I've been filming on the iPhone in they have the ProRes mode. So ProRes, it has the high quality mode, because not only is it very nicely stabilized, you're in the wide angle mode. So I only use the two lenses, the 1 and 2 setting on the video. The 3, the telephoto, is garbage. You can't use that. I agree. Is fantastic. And the beauty of this is I can film and work an entire typhoon and do everything I need to do on this one single gadget.
Okay, wow, okay. Now I'm amazed. I didn't realize that's what you use now. And ironically enough, just when I was in Japan, that's what I got myself. So I've got the 14.
Nice.
Now for work, I don't know if one thing I've been sharing, I've got a few roles. I'm not just a teacher at my school, but also because of my social media nerdiness, I'm also in charge of now social media for my school. So I have this. Right. So I have an iPhone 14 Pro, which belongs to my school, but that's what I use for recording that. So that's how I do know about that third lens, that zoom lens. Yes. I've got a 14 and a 14 Pro. And I'm like, you know what? That zoom.
Yeah, it's rubbish. So we'll see if they can improve on that. Yeah. But so I'm thinking literally in future, if I'm going to places like, I don't want to name countries, but places which involve a lot of flying, transiting through airports, I can, and obviously this is the another of the most important
the GoPro
gadgets I have. The GoPros, I have a lot of these. So let's just if I'm in my usual comfort zone, if I'm going down to Okinawa, Philippines, Taiwan, just traveling around Asia where I know the airlines aren't going to lose my baggage, I'll pack maybe 12, 13 GoPros.
Oh, really?
I'll have them. I have a lot of GoPros. And then I'll take my drone. So depending on where I'm going, if I'm in Japan, I'll take the Mavic 3. If I'm going somewhere else, I'll take the mini one where it's below the weight restrictions.
Okay, yeah.
I do have a Fujifilm X-H2S, which shoots very nice footage, but I tried to shoot it. I was in the typhoon a few days ago, and I was trying to use the big camera, and the lens was too slow. It was underexposed. It was difficult to find. I was like, screw this camera, all on the iPhone. And I was on the iPhone, and I was getting in the elements. I was putting it in the wind. It had a case on it, and it was getting blasted, and it was doing the job and getting the shots.
Nice.
And I'm thinking just the sheer. I don't want to be thinking about camera settings and like shutter speed. Well, it's important. The basics are important, but
Yeah.
Just want to be shooting and being able to tell a story, and that's so much easier when you can just like flip. Do that, put the selfie camera on, do a piece to camera, flip it around, get a shot. And it looks good.
That's so cool. That's so cool. It's amazing. Like,
then it all goes on YouTube in 5 minutes. Bam, bam, bang on Adobe Premiere Rush or whatever it is, and then upload straight away.
All in one
tool.
You're away. All in one device. That's amazing. The advantages of technology evolving, right? It makes your job easier, and I suppose that aspect. Yeah. So one thing I'm curious about, and I shared some talking points with you before we actually had the interview. One thing that I see when I'm watching TV, one thing I had a pretty big moment of fear this summer when I was in Canada, because I grew up in a place where there were no such thing as tornadoes. But obviously with climate change and the way things are, the world weather is evolving, and it's evolving at a very fast, unpredictable rate. And where I was living, where I was staying near my family, is outside of the capital of Canada, Ottawa. And now they're saying that Ottawa, Canada, that area is becoming Canada's next tornado alley. All of a sudden, a lot of tornadoes are hitting Ottawa, causing damage. So we had a severe tornado warning when I was there with my family, my wife and kids, and we were staying at Airbnb. And what we quickly realized when this tornado came up for our area, this tornado warning, number one, every room had giant windows with glass. There was nowhere to hide. Yeah. And because it was an Airbnb, they didn't want us using the basement. So they had the door to the basement was padlocked shut. And I was just like, holy crap. Like, if this happens, what do we do? I think about that, and then I think about a show that I got to admit I love watching. Someone like Reed Timmer on YouTube. Yeah, very exciting storm chaser in America, and he was the guy with the kind of real exciting, adventurous, wild, rogue weatherman guy on Tornado Chasers. And I know that shows like Tornado Chasers have really spawned a lot of people to get into tornado chasing, and especially a lot of people have no idea what they're doing. People who don't know weather. People who don't have backgrounds in meteorology. And I know that I've heard a lot of stories of people getting hurt, and people being put in risky situations. So what I'm curious about, like, for anyone who is, obviously it's easier to jump into a car and drive around if, wherever you are in the States or Canada to do that compared to what you're doing. You're having to hop on airplanes. But I'm sure sometimes you have come across maybe people who don't really know what they're doing. What are some of the inherent risks to what you do? And for those who would ever be interested in pursuing something like this, what are things that they would need to be really aware of?
Yeah, it's half of my job is just continuous like risk evaluation and assessment. That's constantly what I'm doing, literally from the moment I land in the country, wherever I'm going. But the most dangerous thing, and it might surprise people, and it's not that glamorous, but literally the most dangerous thing, and probably what kills and hurts more people in the whole storm chasing thing, is getting into a car accident. Especially because you're dealing with bad weather, and people aren't concentrating on the road. So sadly, especially in the US, there have been fatalities, among storm chasers, not only outside of actual storm chasing hours when they're kind of between days, when they're relocating to other, but actually during the storm situations. There was one tragic incident where a car with a couple of storm chasers, very experienced, they blew straight through a stop sign and collided with another car which was also full of storm chasers, and everyone tragically got killed. So yeah, that really is the biggest danger. And I've been on some horrendously scary drives, in places like Indonesia or the Philippines, where I'm not the one doing the driving and someone else is doing it, and they're not doing it responsibly. It's oh my gosh, terrifying.
Okay, yeah.
But when it comes to the actual elements itself, and again, it's usually the water that scares me the most. And again, especially if you're in a car and at night, that is things can get scary and out of control very quickly. And when that happens, you need to really, basically you need to do everything you can to stop that situation ever happening. So, I'm still making mistakes, in this typhoon in Taiwan, it hit the town. So I was in a town called Chunggong. The town got a direct hit from the typhoon. The power was mostly out. The hotel, there wasn't really anywhere to stay. So there was another town, a 2-hour drive north, which I've stayed in many times, and we knew the power would be on it. And the idea of just driving up there, getting to a nice hotel and just chilling out was kind of appealing. And I know the road. I thought it would be okay. So we did the drive, and as we set off, another rain band just set up, and it was just dumping rain. And there's a few sections of the road where it gets pretty mountainous. You're right by the coast, and there's cliffs and stuff, and there's like waterfalls actually cascading onto the road, and it's dark, and I'm like, this is kind of stupid. I shouldn't have done this.
Yeah.
But then so far into the journey, you're like, okay, well, let's just get it done. But by the end of that drive, if I saw another like retaining wall by the side of the road, which had water just cascading up it, I was just like, enough of that. I'm done.
Yeah. Just waiting for that landslide to happen, right? Oh my God.
Rock to come down. And every time you see another car coming the other way, like, oh, thank God for that. The road's okay.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, no, I mean, that's insane. That's one of the things I'm really curious about, because of obviously, the journeys you're on, you're going to dangerous places. And I saw like on your Twitter where when you were in Hong Kong, and there was, two videos I thought of on your Twitter from the last week. There was one where you're in Hong Kong, and it looked like something like a large tile fell down and hit the ground near you. And then you can't see you in the frame, but I hear you, and you make the comment, and that's why I wear a helmet. I heard you. And then when I saw you in Taiwan, and you're there, and you've got like these goggles and the helmet on, and you're with someone else, and it's just like blowing like mad. I'm just like, there's that helmet.
Yeah, that's the one. And I've been on trips and I've been in occasions where I haven't been wearing it. Vietnam last September, I walked out onto my hotel balcony in Vietnam. It wasn't even that windy. Had a look, stepped inside, and then about 5 minutes later, these freaking roof tiles the size of like a TV just cascaded off the roof right onto my balcony where I've been standing. Heavy bricks, which if that had hit your head, you're lights out.
Game over, right?
But if you're wearing a helmet, you're going to live. And you're going to be like, but that's so. Things like that, basic precautions. Eye protection is something I've just started wearing, which I should have been using a long time ago, because it doesn't take much, something just a bit of tree leaves or whatever blowing in your eyes can be a problem. So, but the helmet, number one, and having light as well. You always got to have a torch with you in case all the lights go out and it's pitch black. So,
yeah, wow. Cool. Yes. I think this is very cool, and I know a lot of you listening. That's pretty exciting. But don't jump on that plane, everyone, right yet. Don't do that. So, okay, changing gears. I don't want to keep you too much longer. It's getting late into the evening. No. But one thing I'm really curious about, several years ago, all of a sudden there was a new vibe in your Twitter during the down season. You went from like life in Tokyo, which we all know is one of the, the biggest city in the world. Bright light, big city. It's an exciting place, a vibrant place. But you kind of slowed down life during your summer holidays and some of the winter holidays, and it was a new side of James that I love seeing, and it's really interesting. And I've watched your, how shall I say, your own growth as a naturalist.
Yeah.
So tell us about getting a second place in Nagano and why you decided to do that.
So we're kind of lucky in Japan where, there's this whole kind of like the countryside property market is like a steal. There's like amazing properties strewn all across the whole country, which are really kind of affordable to pick up. So COVID kind of forced us to rethink. My wife started being able to work from home. And there was this area of Nagano, which is kind of not many foreigners really go there on holiday because it's not on the Shinkansen. You kind of need a car to explore the area, but it's a mountain range called Yatsugatake, which basically means like 8 peaks, an old volcanic range. And it's stunning. And we've been there on holidays a few times. We've been camping up there. We've stayed in some bed and breakfasts up there. It's got this really kind of like cool, almost European, Canadian kind of cabin vibe, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Which you wouldn't necessarily associate with Japan, but then of course it is Japan, so it's got all the nice Japan stuff as well, like the rice fields and the great food. So it's this real interesting mix, and I kind of fell in love with the place just as a visitor. So we went up there one day in July 2020 to have a look at some houses and found one which was an amazingly good value and fell in love with it. And thought about it for a day and we're like, let's do this, and put in an offer, which was accepted more or less immediately. And little did I know at the time, I found my own little slice of heaven. Yeah. It's just been, I'm not very good at entertaining myself in cities.
Yeah.
There's so much to do, but put me in a house in the countryside with a garden and I will entertain myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it's having a cup of tea outside, listening to the birds for an hour, that will keep me happy. And threw myself into the whole nature thing. And you've been very inspiring and very helpful. You're always there to answer my questions I have especially about birds and insects and things, and just diving into this new environment, a breath of fresh air in every kind of sense and every sense of the word, and great to have that place for my kids. My kids are 9 and 7 and they love it. Yeah, they really love it. As long as they got their Switch to play with in the evening.
You need that balance, right?
And I hope that continues through to their teen years and stuff, because I want to do cool stuff for them. We do a lot of skiing in the winter. We embrace the snow, and the summer is just you're outside of the heat. It's quite unique in Japan because it's actually very high up. It's at 1,300 meters. People have houses up to 1,600 meters, which in Japan is quite rare. Most kind of countryside down in, the houses are down in the valleys. So where we are totally escaping the crazy Tokyo heat or the city heat, which hits Japan every summer, and this year especially has been horrendous. Yeah, it's just every season is fabulous except for spring. Spring is cold. By April I want to be kind of wearing a t-shirt, and it's still chilly up there.
Yeah. No, that's one of the things that's I remember I grew up in Eastern Canada, and it's just like, spring was just miserable. It was wet and disgusting. And nasty. And it was
spring in, what it's like. Spring in Kobe, Osaka, Tokyo is fabulous. It's just beautiful. So put me in the city in spring.
Cool. Wow. It's so again, everyone, go follow James on Twitter, on Instagram. To see these things, to see these images, to see the storm stuff, but also to see during the off season that kind of quieter slice of life stuff, and birds. And I always remember that time you had that kind of intrigue where you had a nesting box you'd put on a tree, but then there was a snake that had trying to eat the babies, the birds.
There's always cool stuff happening. That was the
real life drama.
Yeah, no, there was a snow day at the house, so I was like, I put like 2 kilos of sunflower seeds in the garden for them. And it was like some crazy house, like the number of birds. And then, for the first time ever, there was a hawk, which had seen what was going on. And it was he went in and had a go at the birds. And I was like, whoa, this is crazy drama. And
this is like this National Geographic in front of me in a different way.
What's going on? I've never seen a hawk in the garden before. So, it's just always, when you're in nature, there's always going to be interesting kind of things. If you're keeping your eye out for it, you're always going to
I'm experiencing now, here I am.
Totally.
And just my walks to work in the morning are insane. Like I walk to work, I'm only like a 10-minute walk from my school, but it's all jungle on one side, like dense jungle, which I'm trekking into for the first time tomorrow morning.
Amazing.
I'm really excited. And, it's like today I'm outside of my school and like the deputy head of school is like having a conversation with me in the parking lot. Cause he was someone I used to work with in Beijing. And he's like, Kevin, how are you settling in? Like, how are you liking it? And as he's talking, I'm like looking over his shoulder because there's a fence about 3 meters behind him. And there's a whole troop of monkeys walking along the fence and they kind of stop and look at us. And they're these big, dusky langurs that have the brown faces with the big white eyes. And they're kind of looking
cute.
at us. And then they just keep walking along. I'm like, I'm great. And I like point, he like turns around like, I mean, it's insane.
That
and
is so cool.
We have monkeys at our school, monkeys on the campus, monkeys kind of coexist.
Cool.
And it's neat. So I totally get that. And for me now, I'm going through this whole, like, I guess, when you move to Nagano and you're like, all this nature is new to me. For me, I'm seeing things. I'm just like, what is that? What are you? What are you? And, I had a video on my
curiosity and starting from scratch.
I had a video on my Twitter yesterday morning where I'm like walking along the road on my way to school and there's this like fluffy animal on the road. I'm like, what the heck? And I was like, and I can hear me in the video. I'm like, what are you? And it's not a squirrel. It's not a cat. It's not a monkey. What are you? And then it kind of like looked at me and I looked at it. We're only about a meter apart.
That's so funny.
Wiggled across the road. And later on, it's called something called a tree shrew, which is
amazing.
Which was about half the size of a cat, all adorable. And it's got like little short legs that kind of wiggle and it kind of wiggled away. I was like, what are you? Yeah, right. And I mean, thank God for a naturalist. Because
you're deep in equatorial, jungle down there.
There's like pangolins and stuff walking around in the hills here, so it's going to be an exciting thing, kind of like with what you were discovering. James, where can people find you? And I've already been mentioning a few places, but you can actually drop the names and stuff. Where can people find you on social media to follow everything?
Yeah, mostly. I'd say Twitter is the main one I'm on. I refuse to call it X. I'm on Twitter.
Yeah,
YouTube. Twitter and YouTube. It's at Earth Uncut TV. And also trying to build up the Instagram as well and Facebook and stuff. Kind of, but yeah, Twitter and YouTube are the main ones, which I throw most of my effort into.
Cool, guys. So you'll all see the links below for that in the show notes. Everyone listening, you'll follow those links. It's definitely worth your while. Very entertaining. More entertaining than me talking about gardening and tree shrews. Nonetheless. But follow us both. Follow us both to get that balance of tree shrews, whatever they are, and typhoons. James, thank you so much for joining the Just Asia podcast for the first time, and looking forward to having you on again in the future.
Thanks so much. It's, as I said, always a pleasure and great to be on. Cheers.
All right. I want to give a big shout out to James Reynolds. Although that interview was several months ago, it was such a great conversation. And he'll be gearing up soon, I'm sure, for the new typhoon season coming our way, his way, the way of a lot of people. So again, you can follow James everywhere on social media, on X, where he's very active, on Instagram, on YouTube at Earth Uncut TV. The links will be in the show notes. Yeah. So, you know what? Before I started recording this, I was out for a walk this afternoon. My daughter had her first football tournament. She's in year 6, which would be also grade 5, her final year of primary school. And she got into playing soccer, aka football, recently, and she had her first tournament today, and it was a big tournament at our school. It was really great. I was there all morning, And her team, she was on, she's new to the game. So the other girls who are new to the game were on the B team. There was an A squad and a B squad, and she was on the B squad. But they came third place. And the A squad came in second place. So that was really cool. So our school got second and third place in the girls and second and fourth place in boys. And they all played really hard, and we were very proud of them as parents and as staff members. It was very cool. So, afterwards I was going for a walk, and I threw a question out, or a little thing out on X, and I said, hey, for anyone out there who's listening or looking at this, if you would like me to share any stories, tales, if you want me to answer questions about life in Asia, life as a roaming and roving expat for so many years in so many different countries, you let me know and I'll try to answer them. And of course, friend of the show, Paprika Girl, over on X at paprikagirl_JP, said, I'm interested in your anecdotes about traveling in Japan, train, bus stuff, fellow passengers, funny, cute, scary, awkward, things you saw and experienced. Well, thank you so much, Ricky. And Ricky's been on the podcast in the past. Now, I've got so many stories. Two things popped into my mind immediately. One was a bit weird and scary, and the other just kind of strange and safe and maybe dangerous all at the same time. So the first thing that pops into my mind is maybe it was my third year in Japan. I spent my first 2 years, I spent all of my time in Japan living in Kobe. But I was living in Kobe, and my third year I was working at a branch of an international school in Ashiya, Japan. And Ashiya is kind of a well-to-do bedroom community of kind of Osaka. I mean, it's its own city, the city of Ashiya, but it's near Osaka, very near, like just a few minutes away by train. And I was taking the Hanshin, the Hanshin train. And the Hanshin has a bit of a reputation in the Kansai area, this part of Japan. They talk about the different levels of train. Of course, the Hanshin being closest to the water, and then closer to the mountains, then would be the JR, and higher up in the mountains would be the Hankyu. And the closer you are to the mountains, the kind of higher the class of the passengers and the more expensive the train tickets. The Hankyu being the kind of more upper scale people paying more money for their comfy train rides. The JR in the middle, and then you're kind of slumming it when you're riding the Hanshin. But the Hanshin Ashiya station was the closest to my school. So I was on my way to work one morning, and it was very early in the morning, and I'm standing in the very front car of the train, and I'm leaning up against right behind where the driver is. And it's not that busy, and we get to a station called Mikage Station, and as the doors opened, now this is probably about 7 a.m. in the morning, as the doors opened, two salarymen came fighting onto the train. So these two men had clearly been duking it out, like literally having a punch out on the train platform. And they fell into the train, and one man was basically throttling another man, and they're both like well dressed. They're wearing suits, like black suits. They're clearly going to work in the morning, and they fall onto the train, and one man's kind of like choking another man, and they slam up against the other door of the train, and I'm probably about 2 meters away, and I don't even know how to react. I'm just so shocked to see something like this happening while I'm commuting to work at 7 o'clock on a weekday morning. This is the kind of thing you would expect to see on a Friday night, late at night when people have been drinking, but these are guys going to work. So the train is stopped, and when this commotion happens, the driver, who is kind of like right in front of me, turns around and looks in the window, and he sees this melee. It's not really a melee, I guess it's two people. And he grabs like a microphone and says something. I guess he calls for help. And within seconds, there's like 3 station attendants running into the train. They grab the two men, pull the men off the train onto the train platform forcibly, and all like 5 men fall down on top of each other on the train platform. And the doors close on the train, and the train pulls out with me on it, as we normally would, as if nothing had happened. Impressive, right? So I'm wondering a few things. First of all, what the hell happened? Like, what was going on that train platform to lead to these two men having a fight? Were these two men, did they have some kind of rivalry that was simmering for months, if not even years? Maybe one man was always trying to get to the front of the line before the other guy, and every day they were racing and jostling for a position, and finally they broke. I don't know. I wonder what happened. And then what happened to them afterwards? I'm very curious. So that was an interesting experience. Another one to me that popped to my mind when Ricky asked this question was in my final few years of teaching in Kobe, Japan, I would cycle commute to work. So I lived on this man-made island in Kobe Harbor called Port Island. And I worked in an area of Kobe called Naraku, which is very famous for its sake breweries and its sake making. Really steeped in a lot of sake history there. So I had a nice mamachari, which a kind of mommy bike, very heavy duty mamachari. I paid quite a bit of money for it. Not one of those battery operated assisted bicycles. Those things at the time, probably still now, even cost a few $1,000s. But I had a pretty good bike from Konan Home Center, and I cycled every day, and I enjoyed it. And I would have to cycle across Kobe Bridge, which is kind of the iconic red bridge, which is in the Kobe Harbor, and it's in a lot of photographs, and tourist brochures of Kobe and a lot of social media. So one day, as I'm going to work in the morning, I had to go down one hill, kind of crossing a bridge, a pedestrian bridge, and I'd pick up speed, and I'd have to go up this really big hill up onto Kobe Bridge. And as I get to the bottom of Kobe Bridge and I'm heading up the hill, off in the distance, I want to say like 500 meters in front of me, I see a man on a bike way up there. And he gets to a certain point where the bridge is kind of exposed more to the elements, I suppose. And the man just fell over. He just fell off his bike. And I thought, that's weird. And I'm still cycling closer, and I can see the man get up and start pushing his bike. Behind him, not that far, but in front of me, is a woman, like a salary woman, an office worker looking by the way she's dressed. And she's on her bicycle. And all of a sudden, she just falls off her bike, too. She falls over. And I'm like laughing to myself. I'm like, what a joke, these people up here who can't ride bikes well. Because, of course, me, Kevin, I'm really good at riding a bicycle. And what could possibly, what's happening? How can they just fall off their bicycles? That's so silly. And I was like literally laughing at them from far away, not quite understanding what was going on. These two people just fell off their bikes. So as I'm coming up the bridge, just about to get to the kind of main part of the bridge, I get right to the same area that those two folks were. And out of nowhere, like a hammer hitting me, a gust of wind came blowing along, and it hit me, and I fell right off my bike. Boom! Right on the ground. It knocked me clear off my bike. I just fell down with my bike, Fell down with my bike. Boom! And there I am at the time, like an 80-kilo man on a heavy steel bike. Not a carbon fiber bike, a steel mamachari. And it just, boom, there was nothing I could do. And then I went, as I kind of get up from the ground and start pushing my bike along. That's what happened to them. And it was really windy, blowing a gale up on top of that bridge. And I just pushed my bike along the rest of the way across the bridge, like all the other people in front of me who had fallen down were doing as well. So that was a fun little story, I think. Yeah, so there you go. Thanks for the questions and the request for some tales, Ricky. I hope you enjoyed that. And I hope you all enjoyed that. All right, folks. Well, that's it for episode number 214 of the Just Japan podcast. I'm going to be coming up on a break soon. I'm going to have a 2-week spring break. I'm really looking forward to that. I'll be getting some good interviews recorded during that time. Not going to be traveling anywhere. I'm going to be staying right here in Penang, Malaysia. It's going to be pretty exciting. Been spending lots of time recently on Instagram, on a lot of Akia Bank, different accounts, different real estate accounts, looking at lots of homes for sale in Japan, daydreaming and dreaming, looking at a lot of different properties, not in the market yet, but, in the next few years, I plan on buying something in Japan. That's where we'll be settling down. So it's been really cool to just spend a lot of my time drinking coffee and looking at different houses for sale and thinking about the future. So guys, like I mentioned at the very beginning of the podcast, you can support the show over on Patreon. Would really appreciate it. A big thanks to Charles W., who is a supporter over on Patreon. Thank you so much for helping us out with the show. Remember, there's a lot of great bonus content out there, especially the Spicy Wasabi podcast. Just put up a new episode of that recently. I'm going to be recording 2 more episodes of that this week coming up. And that's only for patrons out there. You can also get video versions of all the episodes, all there on Patreon, plus other things as well. So go check that out. The links are in the show notes. I'd really appreciate that. So go check it out over at patreon.com/JustJapanPodcast97. All right, well, you guys can follow me, of course, on social medias, on X at MadForMaple, on Instagram at Japan Night Scenes, and Jaylan Kev. A couple of accounts there for you. And of course, go to the Just Japan Podcast Facebook page. I'm really active over there, posting every single day a bunch of stuff. And that's at facebook.com/JustJapanStuff. So go check that out. Lots of stuff there every day. Videos. I've even put some vlogs up there. Oh, I've also recently been putting up a few vlogs on my YouTube channel, Busan Kevin on YouTube. I think the last 2 weeks I put up 2 kind of travel, life in the day, travel vlogs of me here in Penang, Malaysia. So go check that out as well. I'm trying to get more active on YouTube again. So that is it for this episode of the podcast. Please share the podcast with friends of yours who are interested in Japan, or just friends of yours who are interested in very interesting people and interesting storytelling. And that's it. Of course, leave a rating and a review. Back in the day, many, many people left many ratings and many amazing reviews, but it would be great to get a few new ones in there as well if you're new to the show. All right, well, that's it, guys. My name's Kevin O'Shea. I am a Canadian who has been living abroad in Asia for more than 22 years now. Thank you so much for listening to the Just Japan podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to download it, to listen to it, to support the show, and tell your friends all about it. All right, guys, well, I'll be talking to you next week. I'll have a brand new episode. And until then, hope you're happy, hope you're healthy, and I'll be talking to you really soon.